scripting in OpenAir and how we can extend the use of OpenAir through the scripting engine that has been provided through the interface itself. My name is Jim Shine. I'm with Top Step Consulting. I am the Director of Integrations and System Extensions. In OpenAir, scripting is available to allow data validation and manipulation behind the scenes. The scripting engine that is provided within the OpenAir tool uses standard JavaScript with some specific, what they call NSOA, NetSuite OpenAir, specific libraries to execute database commands. Now note the third bullet on this screen. This is very important. Unlike a lot of web-based scripting, it cannot be used to manipulate the OpenAir user interface. So the idea of putting in JavaScript to move a form field or add a form field or something along that line is not an option. There's two types of scripts that OpenAir allows. There are form scripts and there are scheduled scripts. The form scripts have a trigger of saving, submitting, or approving a form. And you can actually add rejecting a form in there now as well. They're useful for form validation primarily. There's other uses for them, but that's the most relevant. And you can do some limited data manipulation with them. Now we'll talk about why that's limited here in just a minute. Scheduled scripts run on a set schedule, hence the name. And they can run as frequently as every 5 minutes. They're primarily used for data manipulation and adjustments. This is where some of the heavy lifting would be done, is in the scheduled scripts. The reason that form scripts are a bit more limited than scheduled scripts is right here. Scripting governance in OpenAir puts limitations on the number of transactions and the amount of time that a script can execute. Each command that you try to execute in a script takes a certain number of units specified by OpenAir's API. For example, if you try to read a value from a form, it only takes 1 unit. If you write an error message to the log, that actually takes 4 units. And if you're trying to read values from the database, this is a much heavier operation that takes 20 units for the original call to the database and then 10 units for each record. Now, what do these units mean? Well, this is what they mean. As of the April 2016 release, and this didn't change in October 2016, and we do not anticipate it changing in April 2017, the form scripts can run for 5 seconds only, and they can consume 1,000 units. So going back to our numbers in terms of units, if you try to read more than 40 records or so from the database during a form script, you're likely going to hit that 1,000 record or that 1,000 unit limit, which is going to cause the governance of the script to time out and your script will fail. This is why form scripts are primarily useful for just validating what's on the form and little else. Scheduled scripts, however, can run for 60 minutes instead of 5 seconds and can use up to 1 million units. Now that seems like a lot. We've hit that ceiling many times. In fact, probably there are people on this call who have worked with us on these where we've had scripts that have hit that cap. 1 million units is kind of a lot, but if you're trying to do something across, for example, time entries where there are many, many of them, or charges, or something where it's transactional and you have a large number of actual records, you're gonna have to be very aware of that limitation. So the Scripting Center in OpenAir was introduced in October of 2014. It's been enhanced in each subsequent release. It acts as a container within OpenAir to ensure that the scripts that are executed can't harm your OpenAir instance. This is key. This is not like adding custom code outside of OpenAir's world and it's not supported and you're doing something completely outside of OpenAir's best practices. This is fully contained within OpenAir and they have built protections around it so that you really can't damage your system. So it's a safe way to perform these data manipulations behind the scenes. There's a development and deployment cycle that is built into the scripting center that starts with an inactive script. You basically give it a name and there's nothing there. Once you've got some code in there, you can put it in a test mode. Once you're comfortable in your test mode that everything is looking good and the way you want it, you can make it active through a deployment. And then once it is deployed, if you need to edit it, you can leave it deployed while you make changes. And so you'll basically have two versions running on your server. You'll have one that's deployed and one that is not. And the version that's not deployed, you can test even though the deployed version is still running. So that's a useful feature of this workflow. When a script is in testing, it can only be tested by one specific user. That's another feature of this last step in the workflow, meaning that you can put this in test and you can test it while everybody else is seeing the production deployed version. Scripting Center has two basic parts to it. The left side of the screen contains the functions that you can do within the center, and the right side of the screen contains a very large text area for the script itself. In terms of those functions that you have available to you, there's 5 listed here, and they are as follows. The Scripting Studio, which is where the general script information goes, identifies the test owner, the initial function, what libraries you're calling, etc. The SOAP Explorer shows all of the tables and fields that are available for script use in the database. Okay? So it uses the SOAP protocol to show you everything that's in the database, all of the tables and all of the fields that are available within each table. Now, one thing to note here, for whatever reason, OpenAir has not made all of their tables and all of their fields available to the scripting engine. There are still some fields and tables that are inaccessible and some that are read-only. I can't give you a complete list of what those are because that's not published. We don't really know. But I can tell you a few of them as we get into this further that you're not going to be able to either access or you're not going to be able to manipulate. For example, revenue recognition transactions can be read, but they can't be altered. In particular, they can't be deleted. Now, through this scripting center, you actually can delete batch mass quantities of data, which is a feature that's not available anywhere else in OpenAir for most entities. You can't use the OpenAir Integration Manager to delete data. You can't use the web-based interface to delete very many items. There are some entities that are available to delete through the web interface in batch, but not many. But through the Scripting Studio, you can, in fact, do mass deletions of data. So when we say you can't harm your instance, what we mean is that you can't destroy the referential integrity of the database to the point where you just get errors in your instance, but you can mass remove data. The Functions Explorer shows all of the OpenAir specific JavaScript functions. So this goes back to what I mentioned earlier about the NSOA packages that OpenAir has provided for scripting. This will show you all of the values that are in those and what parameters are required for each function. We'll also give you a little example of how to use each function. Script parameters. This is more of an advanced function. If you have a value that you want a script to use, but you don't want to hard code it within the script itself, you can pass it as a parameter. For example, if you want a script to perform a certain function on projects that are in a certain stage, you can set the stage as a parameter, pass that over to the script, and it'll function on that stage, which gives you the opportunity to say, you know, we're actually going to change that stage to this stage instead. And now all you have to do is change the parameter, and it'll function on that new stage, and you don't have to actually change the script code at all. So that's a nice feature. Another common use of that is if you're providing an email address to the script. You have a script that runs and you want it to email you if such and such event occurs, you can put the email address as a parameter, and then if you ever change who you want that to go to, you can just change the parameter instead of having to go in and change the actual script code and retest. There's also a terminology section which displays instance-specific terminology, meaning if you have changed the word project stage to deployment status or something of that nature, this will show you what those changes are, what something is called in your environment. Most of the time you're not going to need this because you're familiar enough with your environment to know what these things are called, but that function exists as a reference for you. There are 5 specific libraries that OpenAir provides. There's a context library, which really is there for system information. It also will tell you how many units you've used up to that point in the script. So going back to what we talked about in terms of scripting governance, this can be very informational to show you how many units you still have remaining to use. There's a form library that gives you all the commands that you need to pull data off of a OpenAir form. Another interesting note on this form library, with the new release coming out next week, they've added the ability to set a value on the form. Up to this point, you've only been able to read it. In the future, starting with this next release, you'll actually be able to set values on that form as well. The meta library is really used for logging alerts, error messages, information that you want the script to communicate back to the user. The record library gives you all of the information about specific record structures in OpenAir's database. So what you would use this for is to create a variable that matches the definition of your project record or your slip record, which is a charge in OpenAir vernacular, or whatever record it is that you're interested in. And then once you have that set, then you can pass data back and forth with that exact structure that matches your database. The WSAPI library is where the real work happens. This is the web service API, and this is the commands that are used to actually read and write to the database. This is where you'll have your write command, your delete command, modifying data, reading it, etc. All of those functions that you need to access the database are in this WSAPI library. So here's an example of a very simple form script. What we've done here is we've built a script for a client that wanted to ensure that no one ever put a negative value as a time entry in their timesheet. And so what this does is it reads the form, it looks at the values in the total field for each time entry. It determines if it spits out a log record that says we found this total, and it shows what that is. And then it says if that total is less than 0, use this form library to spit out an error that says this value must be positive. Now, if you see on the left here, you'll note that there are a number of different forms that you can script. This is not comprehensive. There are some forms in OpenAir that you cannot attach a script to. So be aware of that. Another important piece of information in terms of form scripts, you cannot script worksheets. So if you're using the booking worksheet or the task assignment worksheet in OpenAir as opposed to the task assignment form or the booking form, you are not able to script those worksheets. There's nothing you can do to manipulate the data from those, at least not through the form scripts. So be aware of that. This only works on actual HTML forms, and it only works on the list that you get, that you see here on the left when you click the green plus and you select new form script. This is the list that you'll get when you click the green plus in an attempt to create a new form script. Now, I should say most of the forms are there, but there are a few that are not, so just be aware of that. A scheduled script. I've got 5 different examples here that we've built for folks. Just take you through these briefly. A project closure script that runs periodically and recognizes that a project has recently been moved to a specific stage, say a completed stage or a closed stage. And once it sees that it's moved there, it inactivates all the billing and revenue recognition rules, closes the project, and closes all of its tasks. This prevents any more invoicing from being run, any more revenue recognition, any more time entries. Basically says this thing is done and we're closing it off and locking it and nobody can get to it anymore. Still available for reporting, but that's it. There's a fixed fee revenue split script that we've deployed a number of places that takes a fixed fee revenue transaction, and we've recently changed it so it can also work on charges instead of revenue recognition transactions. And it splits that amount across all of the people that worked on the project based on the number of hours they put in during the period of that fixed fee. So if you have a repeating monthly fixed fee, you may be aware that in OpenAir that gets assigned to one user and only one user, no matter who worked on it. What this script does is it reviews all of the time entries for that project and splits this fixed fee amount based on the proportion of time that each person spent on the project. Budget hours. If you are using transactional budgets in OpenAir, you know you can create a budget line that has a category such as original statement of work or a change order, or maybe it's a labor budget or an expense budget. And you can add a dollar amount to that or a money amount to that and track your budget that way. There's no functionality on there to track budget hours, however, on those transactional budget lines. So what this script does is it allows you to create a custom field on those budget lines, and then it treats those hours just like the dollars, the money values are treated by default. So it will sum up all of those hour lines from your budget transactions, and it will populate your budget hours field with those hours. So it basically extends the functionality of those transactional budgets to include hours. Transactional values, we've done a lot of these types of scripts where some transactional amount, hours, dollars, charges, revenue values, approved hours, whatever it is, associated with the project are summed up and placed into a custom field on that project. What this is primarily useful for is integrations. If you're doing an integration with another system and you want to send that system the number of approved hours, you can't really do that at a project level because the approved hours are a calculated value, not a static value in the project data record. And so what these types of scripts will do is they'll sum all that up and put it in a field on the project so you can then pass it to other tools or report on it right from the project level. And then field propagation is a similar type of script. Basically copies a field on a project properties to every charge or every revenue transaction associated with that project. So if you have a field on the project that you want associated with all of its charges, you could use one of the fields in OpenAir that does that by default, such as a cost center. Or if you're already using the cost center and you need this functionality to extend to custom fields, we can put a script in place that would do that. Similar function would be updating custom project property fields with dates from tasks and milestones. It's another data propagation where we take a value off of a task and populate a field on the project properties with that. So you can identify the prototype complete task or the UAT complete task and populate those end dates of the task on the project itself, allowing you to report status right from the project. We have actually done, I think we've now exceeded the 100 script mark. So these are only just a few examples of the many dozens of scripts that we've done in the last year and a half or so for our various clients. So if there's a certain feature that you're interested in, chances are it can be done through a script if it involves data manipulation and validation. Best practices, briefly. Use your reference guides. OpenAir provides a scripting guide at that URL that is very useful. It gives you all of the information on each one of the functions that are available within the scripting engine, shows you how to use the scripting center. It's a fantastic document. Use that. Use the OpenAir Data Dictionary found at that location. that will show you all of the tables and their fields in OpenAir. Now again, not all of them are going to be accessible through the scripting engine, but the vast majority of them will be. So you have that data dictionary available to you. And then if you need reference help with JavaScript, this is my personal favorite. I don't mean to endorse any particular organization, but when I am looking for JavaScript reference help, this is the site that I use, W3 Schools. There are many different JavaScript reference sites out there. This is just one of the many. And then the SOAP Explorer and the Functions Explorer within the Scripting Center itself. As I'd indicated earlier, those are functions within the Scripting Center in the left bar. The SOAP Explorer can show you all of the different tables and fields within those that are available to the scripting engine. It's a little harder to navigate than the data dictionary, but it gives you a better understanding of what's actually available to the scripting engine. And the Functions Explorer contains those examples of how to use each of the NSOA-specific functions in the Scripting Center. Scripting logs, use your logs. Use the nsoa.meta.log function to generate lines for every significant event. You can set these so that they don't show up in your production logs all the time, so you don't have